Women can't handle combat. It's a biological fact. They don't have the grit, the aggression, the sheer physical dominance required to close with and destroy the enemy. The crowd of soldiers, mostly young men fresh from basic training, shuffled their feet in the oppressive desert heat, a few of them snickering nervously. The voice belonged to Drill Sergeant Gunnar Harding, a man whose personality seemed to have been forged from gravel and pure, unfiltered condescension. He paced before the assembled unit, his jaw set like a block of granite, his eyes sweeping over them with a look of profound disappointment. You think this is a game? You think we're here to play nice? The enemy doesn't care about your feelings. They care about weakness. And sending a woman into a stack, he spat the word, is like sending a canary into a coal mine. It's just a pretty way to find out you're already dead. The laughter that followed this time was louder, more confident, fueled by the bravado of the man in charge. His gaze finally settled on his target. She stood at the end of the line, a full head shorter than the men flanking her, her frame lean rather than imposing. Sergeant Eva Rostova. She didn't flinch. She didn't scowl. Her face remained a placid mask of professional calm, her eyes fixed on the heat-shimmering facade of the concrete structure before them. The infamous kill house, a labyrinth designed to simulate the brutal, claustrophobic reality of urban warfare. Her hands, covered in worn Nomex gloves, rested lightly on the stock of her M4 rifle, her posture relaxed but coiled, a study in potential energy. She made no sound, offered no protest. Her silence was a vacuum, and Harding's ego rushed to fill it. He saw her stillness not as discipline, but as fear. He saw her silence not as confidence, but as weakness. He saw her gender and saw only a liability. But from the observation tower, 200 yards away and behind polarized glass, Colonel Matthews saw something entirely different. He saw the way her rifle was a natural extension of her body, not just a tool she carried. He saw the subtle, almost imperceptible way she canted her head, listening to the wind, processing the environment with an instinct that couldn't be taught. He saw the wear patterns on her gear, the holster worn smooth from a million practice draws, the mag pouches positioned for an economy of motion he hadn't seen since his own days in the Tier 1 community. The colonel leaned forward, a flicker of recognition, of profound and dangerous curiosity, igniting in his old eyes. He had seen that stance before, in places the men below had only read about in classified after-action reports. If you believe that true competence needs no introduction, type proven in the comments below. Harding continued his tirade, his voice a rasping bullhorn of institutional prejudice. "Look at her," he sneered, gesturing with a dismissive wave of his hand. "Barely 120 pounds, soaking wet. What's she going to do when a 300-pound insurgent high on adrenaline kicks a door at her face?" Asked him to respect her personal space. More laughter, coarser this time. The soldiers, eager to curry favor with the formidable drill sergeant, played their part as the compliant audience. They looked at Rostova, seeing what Harding told them to see, a token, a diversity quota, a weak link in the chain. They saw her unremarkable features, her hair pulled back in a tight, regulation bun, the absence of any overt sign of aggression. They mistook her placid demeanor for timidity. They failed to notice the details that Colonel Matthews had seen from his perch. They didn't see the custom-molded grip on her pistol, a subtle modification that spoke of thousands of hours of dedicated practice. They didn't see the faint traces of salt stains on her plate carrier, evidence of long, grueling operations in climates far less forgiving than this desert training ground. They didn't register the way her gaze never lingered on Harding, her focus instead methodically scanning the entry points of the kill house, the doors, the windows, the fatal funnels, her mind already running the angles, solving the geometric puzzle of violence that lay within. Her world had shrunk to the problem in front of her. Harding's voice was just ambient noise, a distraction no more significant than the buzzing of a fly. While he spoke of brute strength, she was calculating lines of sight. While he pontificated on aggression, she was rehearsing the fluid mechanics of a reload under pressure. Her preparation was a silent, internal ballet of practiced movements and cold logic. She adjusted the strap on her helmet, the click of the buckle barely audible. She drew one of her magazines, checked the tension of the spring with her thumb, and slid it back into its pouch with a practiced, frictionless motion. It was a ritual, a form of meditation that centered her in the moment, insulating her from the storm of arrogance breaking around her. The other soldiers fidgeted, their gear rattling, their nerves betraying them in the face of Harding's verbal assault. They were focused on the performance for the drill sergeant. Rostova was focused on the performance that actually mattered. The injustice of the moment was palpable, a thick, suffocating blanket in the dry air. She was being judged, condemned, and dismissed without having fired a single shot, without having taken a single step. Her entire career, her entire being, was being reduced to a crude, biological stereotype by a man who valued volume over substance. And yet, her expression remained unchanged. Her breathing was steady, a slow, rhythmic cadence that betrayed no spike in adrenaline, no surge of anger. It was the calm of a professional who had faced far worse than a loudmouthed instructor. It was the calm of someone whose confidence was forged in crucibles Harding could only imagine. It was a silence that was becoming, with every passing second, more profound and more unnerving than any shouted retort could ever be. It was the silence before the storm. The challenge was laid down with a theatrical flourish of contempt. "All right, Sergeant Rostova," Harding boomed, a malicious grin spreading across his face. "Since you're so eager to prove me wrong with your quiet intensity," he mocked, "you get the honor of going first. We got a new scenario set up. The unwinnable 6 hostiles, 2 hostages, non-combatants scattered throughout. The targets are reactive. They'll drop when hit, but they're programmed for asymmetrical tactics. They don't just stand there. They move, they flank, they use cover. No one's cleared it yet. The record is 3 hostiles down before being neutralized by the internal sensors. Go on. Show us how it's done." He had designed it himself, a meat grinder of a course meant to humble even the most seasoned operators. The rooms were arranged in a confusing L shape, with multiple entry points, long hallways exposed to fire from hidden alcoves, and targets placed cruelly close to the hostage dummies. It was a test of speed, precision, and tactical decision-making under impossible pressure. It was designed to induce failure. It was designed to prove his point. Rostova simply nodded once, a short, sharp dip of her chin. "Understood, drill sergeant." Her voice was level, devoid of emotion, a simple statement of fact. She moved to the designated starting position at the breach point, the heavy steel door that marked the entrance to the concrete maze. The other soldiers watched, a mix of pity and morbid curiosity on their faces. They were expecting a fiasco, a quick and embarrassing failure that would validate Harding's tirade. They expected her to be overwhelmed, to freeze, to make a fatal error in the first room. They gathered behind the safety line, ready for the show. Rostova ignored them all. Her world contracted to the door in front of her and the unknown darkness behind it. She took a single, deep, controlled breath, held it for a count of 3, and exhaled slowly, her heart rate settling into a low, powerful rhythm. This was her element. The noise, the politics, the prejudice, it all melted away. There was only the mission, the problem to be solved. She brought her rifle up, the stock settling into the familiar hollow of her shoulder. Her non-firing hand found its place on the handguard, her grip firm but not tense. She pressed the side of her helmet, activating her comm's link to the control tower. "Range is hot. Commencing run," she stated, her voice as calm as if she were ordering a coffee. The buzzer blared, a harsh, grating sound that signaled the start of the exercise. And then she moved. It wasn't a rush. It wasn't a frantic explosion of energy. It was a flow. She moved with a predatory grace, a fluidity that seemed to defy the bulky reality of her combat gear. She didn't kick the door. She used a specialized tool to pop the lock with a quiet, efficient snap. She didn't storm the room. She flowed through the doorway, staying low, a ghost hugging the wall, her rifle's optic already scanning, processing, and categorizing everything in the room in a fraction of a second. The first hostile target popped out from behind a stack of barrels. Before it could fully expose itself, there was a double tap of suppressed cracks, so close together they sounded like one. 2 rounds, center mass. The target dropped. She was already moving, pivoting to the next corner, her feet making almost no sound on the gritty concrete floor. The control room was a symphony of stunned silence. On the bank of monitors, a dozen different camera angles tracked Rostova's progress, a green icon moving through a digital blueprint of the kill house. Harding stood with his arms crossed, his smug expression slowly beginning to curdle into disbelief. The soldiers behind the safety line crowded around a single monitor that showed a live feed, their jeers and whispers dying in their throats. What they were witnessing was not a struggle. It was a masterclass. It was a clinic in controlled violence. Rostova moved through the first room and into the long hallway, the most notorious part of the course. It was a 50-foot kill zone, with 2 doors on the left and an open alcove on the right. Harding had programmed the targets to engage sequentially, creating a deadly crossfire. As she entered the hallway, a target popped from the far end. Most soldiers would engage it immediately, exposing themselves to the threats on their flank. Rostova didn't. In a split-second calculation, she identified it as a bait target. She ignored it, instead snapping her rifle towards the first door on the left, firing 2 rounds through the thin plywood. The sound of a target dropping on the other side was confirmation. She had shot through the cover, anticipating the threat's location based on the geometry of the room. A second later, a hostile emerged from the second door. 2 more cracks, and it was down. She then pivoted to the alcove on her right, where a third hostile was swinging its weapon around. Before it could acquire a target, her rifle was already there. Double tap. Target down. Finally, with the immediate threats neutralized, she addressed the bait target at the end of the hall. 2 more precise shots, and the hallway was clear. She had cleared 4 hostiles in the time it took most soldiers to engage the first one. The entire sequence had taken less than 5 seconds. No way. One of the younger soldiers breathed, his voice filled with awe. Harding's face was now a mask of rigid shock, his knuckles white where he gripped the railing. He couldn't process what he was seeing. This wasn't supposed to happen. She was moving with a level of instinctual, predatory efficiency that he had only seen in grainy footage from classified operations. She reached the final room. The scenario's cruelest twist. 2 hostiles were positioned behind a large table, using 2 hostage dummies as human shields. They were programmed to pop up and fire from alternating sides of the hostages, making a clean shot nearly impossible. It was a classic no-win scenario designed to force a hostage casualty and an automatic failure. Rostova entered the room low and fast. She didn't stop. She didn't hesitate. As the first hostile popped up from the left side of a hostage, she didn't aim for the head or chest. She fired a single, precise round that struck the target's weapon, a sensor indicating a disarm shot. As the target recoiled, she transitioned fluidly to the second hostile emerging on the right, placing 2 rounds in the sliver of its head visible over the hostage's shoulder. She then returned her aim to the first target, which was now fully exposed, and finished it with a final, controlled pair of shots. The silence that followed was absolute, broken only by the faint electronic chime from the control room signaling the end of the run. Run complete, the automated voice announced. All hostiles neutralized. 0 hostage casualties. 0 non-combatant casualties. Time, 58.7 seconds, a new base record. The previous record was 3 minutes and 12 seconds, with 2 hostage casualties. The room of soldiers was completely, utterly silent. They stared at the monitor, then at the exit of the kill house, their minds struggling to reconcile the quiet, unassuming woman they had mocked with the lethal specter they had just witnessed on screen. The deafening silence was her answer. It was more powerful, more definitive, and more humiliating for Harding than any words could ever be. His entire worldview, his loud, arrogant certainty, had just been systematically dismantled in under a minute by a quiet professional who had refused to even acknowledge his insults. Colonel Matthews descended from the observation tower, his face impassive, but his eyes glinting with a cold, hard light. He walked with the unhurried, deliberate stride of a man whose authority was absolute and required no announcement. The soldiers parted before him like the Red Sea, their awe for Rostova now replaced by a nervous fear of the approaching colonel. Harding snapped to attention, his face pale, the swagger and arrogance completely drained from him, replaced by the rigid posture of a man expecting a hurricane. Matthews ignored him, his gaze fixed on Sergeant Rostova as she emerged from the kill house. She was calmly reloading her magazines, her movements just as methodical and unhurried as they had been before the run. She showed no signs of exhilaration, no flush of victory. For her, it was simply a task, professionally executed. The colonel stopped directly in front of her. The assembled soldiers held their breath, expecting a commendation, perhaps a quiet word of praise. But Matthews did something else entirely. He looked her up and down, not with judgment, but with a deep, searching respect. His eyes met hers, and for a moment, a silent communication passed between them, a shared understanding of the world they both truly inhabited, a world far removed from this dusty training range. Then, Matthews turned to his aide. "Captain, bring me Sergeant Rostova's file, the unredacted one." Now the captain, sensing the gravity of the moment, hurried off. Harding shuffled his feet, a bead of sweat tracing a path through the dust on his temple. He knew he was in trouble, but he couldn't yet comprehend the scale of it. He had insulted a sergeant, a serious offense, but perhaps survivable. He had no idea he had just publicly humiliated a living legend. The captain returned with a thin, digital slate, which he handed to the colonel. Matthews powered it on, the screen casting a faint blue light on his stern features. He didn't look at the file himself. He already knew, or at least suspected, what he would find. He turned the screen around so that Harding and all the other soldiers could see it. He began to read, his voice calm, clear, and utterly devastating. Name, Eva Rostova. Rank, Sergeant First Class. A murmur went through the crowd. She wore the rank of a sergeant, but her file stated she was a Sergeant First Class, a senior NCO. It was a sign of a special assignment, of an operator working outside the conventional structure. Matthews continued, his voice dropping an octave, taking on the tone of a historian reciting a sacred text. Unit classification, Special Missions Unit, Task Force 11. Tier 1 Operator. The air was sucked out of the soldiers' lungs. Task Force 11 wasn't a unit they talked about. It was a ghost, a myth, the tip of the spear that the public, and even most of the military, didn't know existed. It was the unit sent to the places that officially didn't exist to solve problems that were never acknowledged. Harding's face went from pale to ashen. He felt a cold dread creeping up his spine. He hadn't just insulted a female soldier. He had insulted one of the most elite, highly trained special operators on the planet. The colonel wasn't finished. He let the weight of that revelation sink in, letting the silence stretch until it was uncomfortable. Then, he continued, his finger tracing down the screen, each word a hammer blow to Harding's shattered ego. Combat deployments. 17, he paused. Classification. Top secret/code word. He looked directly at Harding. That means, drill sergeant, that she has spent more time in active combat than your entire platoon has spent in the military. Combined, he swiped the screen. Awards and decorations. Silver Star with 2 oak leaf clusters. Bronze Star with V device for valor for clusters. Purple Heart, 3 clusters. The list went on, a litany of a nation's highest honors for courage under fire. He was reading a history of the shadow wars of the last decade, and she was the protagonist. Special qualifications. Matthew's voice was now laced with a profound reverence. Master Instructor, U.S. Army Special Operations Target Interdiction Course. Lead Doctrine Writer, Asymmetrical CQB Tactics. Master rating in 7 different weapon systems, foreign and domestic. Graduated top of her class from every conceivable operational school. He finally lowered the slate, the silence now thick with a mixture of awe, shame, and terror. He looked at the assembled soldiers, his eyes burning with a righteous fury. "You see this sergeant," he said, his voice dangerously quiet. "You see her, and you make assumptions. You see her size, and you assume she is weak. You see her gender, and you assume she is incapable. You hear her silence, and you assume it is fear." He took a step closer to Harding, who looked as if he might faint. "Drill sergeant, you are a teacher. Your job is to strip away assumptions and build soldiers. But you have demonstrated today that you are ruled by your own ignorance. You mistook discipline for meekness. You mistook professionalism for passivity. You mistook a lifetime of honed, lethal competence for a liability." The colonel turned back to Rostova. In a gesture that sent a shock wave through the entire formation, he straightened his back and rendered a slow, perfect, formal salute. A full colonel, a base commander, saluting a sergeant. It was a breathtaking breach of protocol, and yet, in that moment, it was the most appropriate gesture in the world. It wasn't a salute to her rank. It was a salute to her reality. "Sergeant Rostova," he said, his voice ringing with absolute authority and respect. "Your demonstration was exemplary. You have reminded us all what a true warrior looks like." "Thank you," Rostova, for the first time, showed a flicker of reaction. She returned the salute with the same crisp precision she did everything else. "Thank you, sir," she said, her voice still a quiet, level monotone. The validation was complete. The quiet professional had been vindicated not by words, but by the undeniable truth of her existence, a truth now laid bare for all to see. The story of what happened at the kill house on Range 17 spread through the base like a wildfire fanned by desert winds. It started with the soldiers of Harding's platoon, who recounted the tale in the mess hall in hushed, reverent tones. They spoke of the impossible speed, the flawless precision, the chilling calm of Sergeant Rostova. They described the colonel's face, the reading of the file, and the salute that had shattered the base's rigid hierarchy. From the mess hall, it jumped to the motor pools, to the barracks, to the air traffic control tower. The range controllers, who had the official recordings, became minor celebrities, replaying the footage for stunned NCOs and officers who couldn't believe what they were seeing. They gave the run a name, the Ghost Run. The legend grew with each retelling. Her time got faster, the number of targets increased, the complexity of the scenario became more demonic. She became a myth, a cautionary tale for the arrogant, and an inspiration for the diligent. The story became a powerful tool, a piece of institutional folklore. Instructors began using it as a lesson. "Remember Rostova," they would tell new recruits. "Don't ever judge a book by its cover. The quietest person in the room is often the most dangerous." Drill Sergeant Harding was not formally punished, at least not in a way that would show up on paper. Colonel Matthews knew that public humiliation was a far more effective corrective tool. Harding was assigned to oversee the maintenance of the kill house for a month, a tedious, humbling job. He spent his days replacing targets, recalibrating sensors, and sweeping up brass casings. Every day, he had to walk through the same rooms where his prejudice had been so thoroughly and silently dismantled. He had to look at the targets she had engaged, the impossibly tight shot groups, the evidence of a skill level he could never hope to achieve. The experience changed him. The arrogance was sandblasted away, leaving behind a humbled, more reflective man. One afternoon, he saw Rostova at the armory, meticulously cleaning her rifle. He walked over, his posture uncertain, his usual booming voice reduced to a quiet murmur. "Sergeant," he began, unable to meet her eyes. "Sergeant Rostova." She looked up, her expression neutral. "Drill Sergeant," she acknowledged. He struggled for words. "What you did, back there, I've never seen anything like it. I was wrong. What I said, it was ignorant, unprofessional." He finally looked at her. "I was wondering if you'd be willing to show my men some of what you know. About movement, about mindset, anything. They'd listen to you." It was the closest he could come to an apology, and it was more meaningful than any formal statement. It was an admission of her superiority, a request for her knowledge. Rostova finished reassembling her bolt carrier group with a practice click. She looked at the humbled man before her, a man who had publicly derided her very existence. She saw no triumph in his defeat, only an opportunity to improve the unit. Her purpose was not to win arguments. It was to complete the mission and make those around her better. She nodded once. "Yes, drill sergeant. I can do that. What time do you want me on the range?" Her answer, simple and devoid of any lingering resentment, cemented her legend. She wasn't just a hyperlethal operator. She was a true professional, a leader who put the mission and the welfare of the soldiers above her own ego. She began holding weekly training sessions for Harding's platoon, and soon, soldiers from other units were asking to attend. She didn't lecture. She didn't boast. She taught by demonstration. She would run a drill, then break down the mechanics of it in quiet, technical terms, the importance of footwork, the efficiency of a proper reload, the psychology of dominating a room. She spoke of economy of motion, visual patience, and processing speed. She was teaching them the science behind the art of combat. The soldiers were mesmerized. They hung on her every word, their respect for her absolute. They saw firsthand the discipline and dedication required to reach her level of mastery. They saw that her strength wasn't about gender or size. It was about a relentless pursuit of perfection. The kill house on Range 17 was unofficially renamed the Ghost House in her honor. The paper target from the final room of her record-breaking run, the one with the 2 rounds through the sliver of a head and the disarmed shot on the weapon, was framed and hung on the wall of the range control office. Underneath it, a simple brass plaque was mounted. It didn't list her name or rank. It just said the standard, 587 seconds. It became a symbol, a holy relic for the base's training cadre. It was a permanent, physical rebuttal to the kind of prejudice Harding had once championed. It was a testament to the fact that competence is its own credential. The ripple effects of that single day continued to spread. Harding became one of Rostova's staunchest advocates. He transformed from a cynical gatekeeper into a true mentor, fiercely protective of all his soldiers and merciless on anyone who judged them on anything other than their performance. He was often heard telling new NCOs, "You think you know who your best soldier is? You don't. Wait until the shooting starts. The one who's calm, the one who's focused, the one who isn't talking. That's your warrior." Watch that 1 inch. He never mentioned Rostova by name when he told the story to new classes. He didn't have to. Everyone knew. She remained an enigma, a quiet presence on the base. She deflected praise, avoided the spotlight, and continued her work in the shadows. Her legacy wasn't in the stories they told about her, but in the higher standards she set, the improved skills of the soldiers she trained, and the broken assumptions she left in her wake. She proved that the most profound statements are not always spoken, and the greatest victories are often won in silence. A year passed. The sun beat down on the same desert training facility, but the atmosphere had changed. A new group of young soldiers stood before the kill house, their faces a mixture of nervousness and determination. Standing before them was Drill Sergeant Harding. He was still tough, still demanding, but the sneering arrogance was gone, replaced by a weary wisdom. He no longer paced like a caged animal. He stood still, observing his soldiers with a careful, analytical eye. He was looking for the quiet ones, the focused ones. He was looking for the next Rostova. His pre-exercise briefing was different now. He didn't speak of aggression or brute force. He spoke of precision, of discipline, of mindset. "In there," he said, gesturing to the concrete structure, "loud gets you killed. Fast gets you killed. What keeps you alive is being smooth. Smooth is fast. And smooth comes from here." He tapped his helmet. "It comes from thousands of hours of perfect, quiet practice. It comes from knowing your weapon, knowing your body, and knowing your mind. Everything else is just noise." He then walked them over to the range control office. He pointed to the framed target on the wall. "This," he said, his voice dropping with reverence, "is the standard. 58.7 seconds. 0 mistakes. It was said a year ago by a sergeant who was smaller than any of you. A sergeant many people, including myself, made the foolish mistake of underestimating. He let them look at the impossibly perfect shot placement. Don't ever make that mistake, he continued, his gaze sweeping over each of them. Don't look at the person next to you and make assumptions based on how they look, where they come from, or who they are. The only thing that matters on the battlefield is competence. Competence is the only currency. Everything else is counterfeit. It was a powerful lesson, made all the more so because they knew he had learned it the hard way. The story of the Ghost Run had become a foundational myth of the base, a parable taught to every new arrival about the dangers of prejudice and the supreme virtue of quiet professionalism. Sergeant Eva Rostova was no longer on the base. She had moved on to her next classified assignment, a ghost returning to the shadows. She left no forwarding address, no official record of her time there beyond the scorched brass on the range and the legend that echoed in the barracks. But her legacy was everywhere. It was in the improved marksmanship scores of the base's soldiers. It was in the cautious, respectful way NCOs now assessed their new arrivals. It was in the quiet confidence of the female soldiers who saw her as proof that no door was closed to them. Her actions had created a permanent, positive shift in the culture of the institution. She had not set out to be a trailblazer or a symbol. She was simply a professional doing her job to the best of her extraordinary ability. But in doing so, she had become something more. She became a standard. Her story served as a timeless reminder that a person's worth is not defined by the volume of their voice, but by the quality of their actions. Respect is not a right to be demanded. It is a consequence to be earned through demonstrated excellence. True strength does not need to announce itself. It is felt in its presence and proven by its results. The loudest person in the room is often the one with the most to prove and the least to offer. The quiet professional, the one who focuses on the work rather than the credit, is the one who ultimately shapes the world. Their legacy is not etched in monuments of stone, but in the living, breathing standards they pass on to the next generation. It is a legacy of competence, a legacy of discipline, a legacy of humility. It's the quiet understanding that the job will be done, the standard will be met, and the mission will be accomplished, not for applause or recognition, but because that is what a professional does. The echo of her silent, perfect run through the kill house would resonate for years, a permanent lesson that true power doesn't need to shout. For more stories where competence triumphs over prejudice and where quiet professionalism defines their worth, subscribe to Unknown Heroine Stories.